We are diving straight into the deep end today. We have a very specific mission.
We do.
We're analyzing the teaching methodology of a center called THEIELTSFOCUS. But, and this is the key thing, we're not doing this by, reading their marketing brochures.
No, absolutely not. We're analyzing it through the lens of one of the most respected texts in the field of linguistics.
Jeremy Harmer's The Practice of English Language Teaching.
Specifically, the 5th edition.
That's our source of truth here. This is really the gold standard for understanding how languages are, well, actually learned versus how we often think they're learned.
It really is. And our goal is to unpack the specific pedagogical triad that defines this center's approach.
Right, a triad. So we're looking at 3 distinct pillars.
Exactly. First, there's English for academic purposes, or EAP. Then, the lexical approach.
And finally, task-based learning, TBLT.
Correct. And we're going to be looking at chapters 1, 4, and some other sections in Harmer to see if the theory really matches up with the practice.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, at the macro level. Harmer draws this massive distinction in the first chapter.
He does.
It's between general English and English for specific purposes, or ESP. I think most of us have a vague idea of what that means, but how does Harmer actually define that landscape?
It's a fundamental divide. If you look at the vast majority of school systems around the world, and, probably the way you and I learned languages in high school, you're looking at what Harmer calls general English.
Okay.
He explicitly defines this as the predominant model in schools.
Yeah.
And the core characteristic of general English is that the language is taught as a subject for its own sake.
Right. It's like history or geography. You learn it because it's on the curriculum.
Exactly. The syllabus is driven by the language itself.
So you open the textbook, and Unit 1 is the verb to be. Unit 2 is the present simple.
Unit 3 is family vocabulary.
Yes.
The teacher, or maybe the school board, decides on the language structures first, and then they try to find some content or topics to fit around those structures.
The assumption being that learning English is just generally good for you.
A kind of well-rounded educational asset, sure. But there's no specific, immediate application in mind.
It's just-in-case learning. You learn the present perfect continuous just in case you might someday, eventually, need to describe an action that started in the past and is continuing to the present.
Precisely. And look, that works for general education, but THEIELTSFOCUS operates under a completely different umbrella.
Which Harmer calls ESP English for specific purposes.
This is where the script flips entirely. In ESP, the syllabus isn't dictated by a list of grammar rules that some linguist decided on 50 years ago.
So what dictates it?
The learner's needs. It is dictated entirely by the learner's professional or vocational needs. Harmer says these are driven by identifiable reasons for learning.
Identifiable reasons, so not just to be a well-rounded person.
No, it's, I need to do my job, or I need to get through this university course.
And Harmer uses some really good examples here. He talks about nurses and pilots, right?
He does. He talks about the specific language needs of nurses and hospitals, or air traffic controllers and pilots. And this isn't just about learning a few different vocabulary words. No, it leads us to the critical concept of needs analysis.
Needs analysis.
You simply cannot teach ESP without doing a needs analysis first. Harmer cites the work of Henry Emery with aviation English to show just how intense this can get.
This was the part that just blew my mind. To design a course for pilots, they didn't just sit in the library and think, what do pilots probably say?
No, that would be incredibly dangerous. Emery's work involved. Well, it involved effectively sitting in cockpits.
In the actual
In cockpits and in air traffic control towers, recording and analyzing the actual language being used during flights. They had to capture the real-time communication to ensure safety and efficiency.
Wow.
They needed to know exactly how a pilot requests a change in altitude or how they acknowledge a warning. Not how a textbook says they should do it, but how they actually do it under pressure.
It's like linguistic anthropology. You're observing the tribe of pilots to understand their communication protocol.
It is. And Harmer also mentions David Wood's analysis of workplace settings. Wood didn't just guess what business people sound like.
He observed them too.
He analyzed the specific chunks and formulaic structures that native speakers use in meetings and negotiations.
So bringing this all back to THEIELTSFOCUS, they're applying this exact same rigor.
That's the idea. They aren't teaching general English. They're teaching a very specific branch of ESP.
Which is EAP English for academic purposes.
Exactly.
So if aviation English is for keeping planes in the sky, EAP is for, what? keeping students alive in the university.
Essentially, yes, that's a great way to put it. EAP is specifically for students who are pursuing tertiary education.
University college.
Right. And Harmer is very clear that this is a distinct skill set. It is not just about having good grammar or a wide vocabulary.
It's about functioning.
It is about functioning in an academic world. Harmer lists very specific skills: referencing sources, structuring formal essays, note-taking during lectures, and making presentations.
You know, I think note-taking is such a great example of this because you can be very good at conversational English. You can order food, chat with friends,
Right.
watch movies.
Sure.
But if you sit in a 2-hour lecture on macroeconomics and you don't know how to filter that information and write it down simultaneously, you're going to fail.
Exactly right. Note-taking is a cognitive filter. It requires a specific kind of listening and processing that general English it rarely teaches that.
And this is a crucial distinction for our listeners to understand about this center, the IELTS focus.
It is.
Because many students, and honestly many centers, view the goal as simply passing the IELTS exam. It's just a box-ticking exercise.
Get 7.0, get the visa, goodbye.
Right. But if you apply Harmer's definition of EP, the test is just a gateway.
It's the turnstile at the entrance. That's all it is. The real goal is functioning in that academic world after the test.
So the methodology at the center is using these EAP principles to make sure students can actually perform in a university environment.
Not just pass a paper exam. It's about long-term success, not short-term victory.
I really want to highlight this for the Vietnamese context because I think this is where the aha moment happens for a lot of learners.
It's a credential-heavy culture for sure.
It is, and that's understandable. But the center is explaining that they apply this academic English methodology
The EAP.
to help the student use the language in a real-life university setting. It is about utility.
It has to be. If you get the certificate but you can't write a bibliography or argue a point in a seminar, then what was the point?
The certificate hasn't actually prepared you for the specific purpose you signed up for.
Exactly. So the needs analysis for these students reveals that they need to be researchers and debaters.
Not just test takers.
Precisely.
Okay, so that sets the stage. We know the mission is EAP. Now let's look at the raw materials they're using to build this proficiency.
The building blocks.
Yeah. This brings us to the second pillar of the triad, the lexical approach.
This is a fascinating area because it challenges the way almost all of us were taught to think about language.
How so?
Well, Harmer discusses a long-standing debate in the field: grammar versus vocabulary. For decades, grammar was the absolute king.
Oh, I remember this well. You learn the rule, the skeleton, and then you learn vocabulary words, the bricks, and you stick the bricks onto the skeleton.
That is the traditional slot and filler view of language, subject, verb, object. The cat sat on the mat.
A classic.
But Harmer introduces the lexical approach, which was really popularized by Michael Lewis. And the core concept here is that language does not primarily consist of grammar rules and isolated words.
It doesn't.
It consists of multi-word prefabricated chunks.
Prefabricated chunks. It sounds like construction work. What does that actually mean in the context of speaking?
It means that when fluent speakers talk, they aren't building sentences from scratch word by word in their head.
They're not?
No. We have a vast store of fixed and semi-fixed expressions that we pull them off the mental shelf as whole units. Harmer uses the example of collocations to explain this.
Collocations. These are words that just naturally go together, right?
It's stronger than just naturally. They're words that co-occur more often than chance would suggest.
Okay.
The example from the text that is really sticky is the clenched example.
Oh, right. Clenched fist.
Yes. In English, we say clenched fist or clenched teeth, but we essentially never say clenched eyebrows.
Wait, but grammatically, clenched eyebrows is perfectly correct. Clenched is an adjective. Eyebrows is a noun. Why can't I say it?
You can say it. People would understand what you mean, but lexically, it is wrong.
What do you mean lexically wrong?
It sounds alien. It sounds like a translation from another language. A native speaker would say knitted eyebrows or furrowed brows.
So fluency isn't just about being grammatically correct.
Not at all. It's about knowing which words are married to each other, as you said. Knowing those combinations, those collocations, is what makes your language sound normal and acceptable to native speakers. If a student learns isolated words, they might try to clench their eyebrows.
And while they'll be understood,
They won't sound fluent. They'll sound like they're assembling a language kit.
Harmer also talks about archetypal utterances. These are those phrases we use all the time without even thinking about the grammar. Phrases like, I'll give you a ring, or I'll be in touch.
Or I'll see what I can do. Think about that phrase for a second. I'll see what I can do.
No.
When you say that, you are not mentally conjugating the future tense of the verb to see, then selecting the relative pronoun what, and then the modal verb can.
No, I'm just pressing a button in my brain that says polite delay.
Exactly. You are treating I'll see what I can do as a single linguistic unit, a chunk.
And this connects directly to the mechanism of fluency that Harmer describes.
It does. He argues that a fluent speaker cannot construct sentences word by word from scratch.
Why not? Is it just too hard?
It's a processing issue. It takes too much cognitive power. It's just too slow.
I see.
And Harmer uses this fantastic analogy to explain it. The jazz musician.
I love this analogy. Let's unpack it.
Okay, so a jazz musician who is improvising on stage, they aren't inventing every single note in a vacuum.
No, that would be impossible.
If they had to decide on every semitone individually, they would just freeze. Instead, they have a repertoire of licks. These are musical phrases they've practiced and internalized.
Right, little patterns.
And when they improvise, they are deploying these pre-learned chunks in new sequences, in different keys. They're stitching them together.
So speaking fluent English is like playing jazz. You have your licks, your chunks, and you string them together to fit the conversation.
Precisely. And the conclusion Harmer draws is that teaching chunks reduces processing time.
It's more efficient.
Much more. If you have to build every sentence from the ground up, you will always be halting, hesitant, translating in your head. But if you can just grab a prefabricated chunk, your speech becomes smoother, faster.
This is a massive deal for Vietnamese learners, isn't it?
Oh, huge.
Because I feel like many Vietnamese students are incredibly strong at grammar. I mean, they know the rules better than native speakers do.
Often, yeah.
But when they speak, it can sometimes feel a bit robotic or hesitant.
That is the classic outcome of a grammar-first approach. You are doing math in your head before you speak.
Right.
The lexical approach at THEIELTSFOCUS addresses this directly. By learning fixed phrases, these chunks, it helps the learner speak more fluently and naturally.
Rather than just gluing grammar together.
It moves the processing load from construction to retrieval, and retrieval is much, much faster.
Now, Harmer does mention a counterpoint in the text. He cites Michael Swan, who's another giant in the ELT world.
He is.
And Swan was a bit skeptical of the lexical approach, wasn't he?
He was. Swan called the lexical approach trying to empty the sea with a teaspoon.
Wow. What do you mean by that?
Well, his argument was that there are hundreds of thousands of these chunks in the English language. So if you try to teach them one by one, it's incredibly time-consuming, and you'll literally never finish.
That seems like a pretty valid concern. How does this center get around that? I mean, you can't teach every chunk.
You can't. And this is where the EAP part of the triad saves the day.
Ah, it all links together.
Swan's criticism is valid if you are trying to teach all of general English, but at THEIELTSFOCUS, they're teaching English for academic purposes.
So they don't need to empty the whole sea.
Right. They just need to fill the swimming pool of academic English.
I like that.
They can focus on the specific chunks that are high frequency in academic settings.
Like what?
Oh, things like the data suggests that, or in contrast to, or it is widely believed that. These are the chunks you need to write an essay or participate in a seminar.
So by narrowing the scope to EAP, the lexical approach becomes highly effective and manageable.
Exactly. The teaspoon is big enough for the swimming pool.
That makes perfect sense. So we have the goal, which is EAP. We have the material, the lexical chunks. Now we need the method.
The how.
How do we actually deliver this in the classroom? This brings us to the third pillar, task-based learning, or TBLT.
This is the engine room of the methodology. And to understand why TBLT is so different, we have to contrast it with the traditional way of teaching.
Which is often called PPP.
PPP, presentation, practice, production.
Right. In a PPP lesson, the teacher starts by presenting a rule, say, the past tense.
Then the students practice it with drills, fill in the blanks.
And finally, they produce it by writing their own sentences. It's very linear.
I teach, you learn, then you use. It feels very safe and very logical.
It does, but
Harmer points out that it doesn't really reflect how people actually learn languages. TBLT completely flips this philosophy on its head.
wow.
The core motto of TBLT is meaning first, form later.
Meaning first.
Harmer notes that the core belief of TBLT is that if students are focused on completing a meaningful task, the language learning often takes care of itself.
What does that mean? Takes care of itself.
It means the struggle to communicate creates the learning opportunity. The need to get your point across forces you to access and develop your language resources.
Harmer quotes David Noonan here, right? Contrasting it with communicative language teaching.
Yes, Noonan argues that while communicative language teaching answers the question why we learn language, which is for communication, TBLT answers the question how.
It provides the framework.
The practical steps. And Harmer details a specific framework by Jane Willis, which is really the blueprint for this.
I want to walk through the Willis framework step by step, because this is what a student at THEIELTSFOCUS would actually experience in a class.
Okay.
It's a cycle with 3 distinct stages.
It is. Stage 1 is the pre-task.
Now, in a traditional PPP class, this is where the teacher would explain the grammar rule. But in TBLT, that doesn't happen, right?
No, it's very different. In the pre-task, the teacher explores the topic and highlights useful words or phrases, but they do not teach the grammar rules.
So what's the goal?
The goal is to build a schema, a mental framework or context for the task. Harmer mentions that students might hear a recording of other people doing a similar task.
So if the task is ordering a pizza, they might listen to a clip of someone ordering a pizza just to get the vibe, the feel of it.
Exactly. They get the context, but they aren't told, use the conditional tense to be polite.
Got it. Then we move to stage 2, the task cycle.
This is the heart of the matter.
And it has 3 parts inside it.
It does. Performance planning and report. First, the students actually do the task.
They just jump in.
They jump in, they do it in pairs or groups. And this is the crucial part that Harmer emphasizes. The teacher monitors from a distance.
That must be so hard for teachers. You see a student making a massive mistake and your instinct is to jump in and fix it.
But in TBLT, you have to hold back. You have to bite your tongue. You are a fly on the wall.
Why?
Because the focus here is entirely on meaning and completing the objective. If the students are trying to find train times from a schedule, the only thing that matters is, did they find the right train time?
It doesn't matter if their grammar was messy along the way.
Not at this stage. As long as they communicated well enough to get the job done.
So they struggle through the task. Then comes the planning phase. What's that?
This is a vital step that is often missed in less rigorous programs. The students have to plan how they are going to report their findings to the class.
Ah, so they have to present what they did.
Yes. And Harmer points out that this is where the shift happens. Because they know they have to speak publicly in a few minutes, they suddenly start caring a lot more about accuracy.
They want to sound good.
They want to sound good. They might ask the teacher, how do I say this correctly? The need for grammar comes from the students, not from the teacher.
It's a huge shift.
It is.
Yeah.
They polish their language because they have a performance coming up, and then comes the report phase where they present what they did.
And only after all of that, after the pre-task, the task, the planning, the report, only then do we get to stage 3.
Stage 3, language focus. This is the form later part of the motto.
So the teacher looks at the mess they made during the task and helps them clean it up.
In a supportive way, yes. Teachers discuss the language that was actually used, they make corrections, and they practice specific patterns that emerged during the task.
The key word there is emerged.
Absolutely. The difference is the students are now incredibly receptive to this grammar lesson.
Because they just struggled with it. They felt the need for it.
Exactly. They have an immediate context. They aren't learning a rule for a test next month. They're learning it because 10 minutes ago, they didn't know how to say what they desperately wanted to say.
Harmer uses a classic example from the history of ELT to illustrate this Prabhu's train timetable.
Yes, the Bangalore project. This is one of the classic early TBL2 examples.
What happened?
The teacher didn't walk in and say, today we learned the present simple tense. No, the class was just given a train timetable and asked to solve a problem. When does the Brindavan Express leave Madras and arrive in Bangalore?
So the students have to ask each other questions like, when does it leave?
Right.
Or what time does it get there?
Right. They are using the grammar because it is necessary to solve the problem. The grammar is a tool, not the subject. As Harmer puts it, the language grows out of the task.
The language grows out of the task.
Yeah.
That is such a powerful summary. So when we step back and look at THEIELTSFOCUS, we're seeing a synthesis of these 3 pillars.
It's a very deliberate architecture.
Can you just quickly connect the dots for us one more time?
Sure. First, EAP sets the goal. We aren't just here to pass a test, we are here for university survival. The test is just a milestone on that longer journey.
Okay, the why.
Second, the lexical approach provides the tools. the building materials. We aren't building language brick by brick. We're acquiring the chunks and collocations needed for fluency and naturalness to avoid that robot English.
Right, yeah.
And third, TBLT provides the environment, the how. We learn by engaging in authentic tasks first to create the struggle and the need, and then we analyze the form later.
It creates a complete ecosystem. You have the destination, the vehicle, and the fuel.
And it directly addresses the user profile Harmer talks about, someone who needs to function in a complex environment.
Which a university definitely is.
If you're going to a university abroad, you are entering a massive 4-year task. You have to listen to lectures, write essays, argue in seminars. You need the chunks to do that fluently, and you need the resilience that comes from task-based learning.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought that Harmer brings up in his section on methodology. He talks about, what was it, emergent language.
Ah, yes. Specifically referencing the dogme movement. This is a really provocative concept.
Oh, so?
It connects deeply to the TBLT philosophy. The idea is that language emerges best when students are interacting and genuinely struggling to communicate something real.
Okay.
And Harmer poses the question. If language emerges from the struggle to communicate, are traditional textbooks that pre-package language actually hindering fluency?
Wow, that's a heavy question. If we are spoon-fed the language before we even know we need it, do we ever really internalize it?
That's the challenge Harmer invites us to consider. He suggests observing your own language use.
For you listening, think about this.
When you are really communicating, telling a story, arguing a point, complaining about your day, are you building sentences from scratch using rules you learned in a book?
Or are you relying on those prefabricated chunks we talked about?
And are you learning more from the struggle of finding the right words than you would from just reading them on a page?
That's a great question.
Exactly. It implies that the messiness of the task-based approach, that moment where you don't know the word and you have to fight to be understood, that isn't a bug in the system.
It's the feature.
It's the entire point. That is where the real learning happens.
That is a fascinating place to leave it. The mess is the method. We have unpacked the EAP goals, the lexical tools, and the task-based method. It's a robust framework that THEIELTSFOCUS is using, grounded in the real science of how we learn.
It is. It's theory put into practice.
Thank you for guiding us through the pedagogical woods today.
It was my pleasure.
And for you listening, next time you are speaking English, ask yourself, am I building a wall brick by brick, or am I playing jazz? We'll see you in the next deep dive. Okay, so let's just strip away the textbooks for today.
Yeah, let's.
We're going to ignore the vocabulary lists, push aside all the grammar drills for a minute, and look at the engine room.
I like that. The engine room.
We're talking about the psychological machinery that really determines whether a student becomes fluent in English or just, spends 10 years memorizing rules they never actually use.
It really is the invisible half of language learning. I mean, you can have the best curriculum in the world, the most expensive software.
The best teachers.
The best teachers. But if the psychology of the learner, that internal drive, the perception of self, if that isn't aligned, then the curriculum is just, well, it's just paper. It's inert.
Exactly. And to do this, we're doing deep dives, specifically for THEIELTSFOCUS. We're taking what is, let's be honest, the Bible of the industry, Jeremy Harmer's Ecomouse. The practice of English language teaching.
The 5th edition, specifically.
Right. And we're going to dissect it to really find the methodology behind their whole learner-centric approach. The mission today is, I think, really clear. We need to understand that psychological engine that drives success.
And we're focusing on three specific pillars that Harmer outlines, which THEIELTSFOCUS really uses as the bedrock of their philosophy.
Okay.
So first, this concept of the ideal L2 self. Second, the huge importance of learner autonomy and agency. And then third, the concrete metrics, the CEF levels. These aren't just buzzwords. They're the components of that engine.
Let's launch straight into that first pillar then. Let's get right into the learner's brain, motivation. Because I think most people assume motivation is just wanting something. I want a good job, or I want to watch Hollywood movies without subtitles.
Wish list, yeah.
But the research, it suggests it's so much more complicated than that, doesn't it?
Oh, it's much more nuanced. And to really get where we are now, you have to look at where we started. For a very long time, I mean, from the 1950s all the way through the 90s, really, the dominant theory came from a researcher named Robert Gardner.
Gardner, okay.
And he split motivation into two very distinct camps: instrumental and integrative.
Okay, let's unpack those. Instrumental. That sounds like a tool, like a hammer or a wrench.
Precisely. Instrumental motivation is purely practical. It's transactional.
So I learn English because I need a promotion.
Exactly. Or I need to pass this university entrance exam. It's a means to an end. And once you get the promotion or you pass the test,
The motivation just evaporates.
it's gone. The instrument has done its job.
And integrative, what was that?
Integrative was this idea that you learn a language because you admire the culture of the people who speak it. You want to, well, integrate into that society.
You want to be like the British or like
Yeah.
the Americans.
Yeah, you want to read Shakespeare in the original or, understand the lyrics of the Beatles. For decades, that was the belief, that integrative motivation was the gold standard. If you loved the culture, you'd learn deeper and faster.
But this is where it gets really interesting and where Harmer points out this massive shift.
A huge shift.
In today's world, who actually owns English?
Right. That is the crux of the issue. English is a global lingua franca now. If a business person from Vietnam is talking to a business person from Germany,
They're speaking English.
you're speaking English, and neither of them is trying to integrate into British or American culture. They're just communicating in this neutral space.
So that old model, the integrative one, it just started to fall apart.
Completely. It didn't
Yeah.
explain why people were learning so aggressively when they had absolutely no intention of moving to London or New York.
And this is where Zoltan Durnyai comes in.
Yes,
Yeah.
Zoltan Durnya, a titan in this field. He completely revolutionized our understanding by shifting the focus away from culture and onto identity. He realized learners weren't trying to become someone else, they were trying to become a better version of themselves. And he introduced this idea of the L2 motivational self system.
Which is the core of our first pillar today, the ideal L2 self. It sounds almost mystical, like something from a self-help seminar,
It does a bit, yeah.
but it's actually very grounded psychology.
Mhm.
What exactly is the ideal L2 self?
It's a vision. It is a vivid, internalized image of the person the learner truly wants to become using the new language. So it's not about liking the culture. It's about visualizing a future version of yourself who is fluent and confident and capable. It's about identity enhancement.
So the motivation isn't coming from the textbook, it's coming from the gap.
Exactly. It's the tension between the actual self, who I am right now, struggling for a word, feeling shy, maybe a little inadequate, and that ideal L2 self.
The me who is commanding a boardroom in English.
Or joking with international friends, or traveling without fear. And the psychological mechanic is that the human brain just naturally wants to close that gap. We fight to become that ideal version. It creates this discrepancy that we are, biologically wired to resolve.
Harmer makes a key point here, though. The image has to be plausible, right? You can't just imagine yourself as the president.
Yes, absolutely. It has to be plausible, but, and this is the key part, sufficiently different from your current self to require effort.
It has to be something you fight for.
You have to fight for it. If the vision is too easy, there's no drive. If it's impossible, there's no hope. It has to be in that sweet spot of aspirational reality. And it needs to be detailed, too. Not just, I speak English, but I am in that meeting negotiating the specific contract in English.
Now there's a flip side to this, a darker twin maybe, the A2L2 self.
The ought-to self is the antagonist in this story, for sure. This is all the attributes that someone believes they must have to avoid a negative outcome.
So this is the student who's studying because their parents said, if you don't get a 6.5 on IELTS, you can't go out for a month.
That's it, exactly. Or you won't get a good job. It's motivation that comes from the outside.
Extrinsic.
It's extrinsic. And Harmer is crystal clear on this. Intrinsic motivation, the stuff that comes from your ideal self, that internal fire, is so much more powerful and sustainable than extrinsic pressure.
So the ought-to self might get you to pass a test.
It might, but it rarely gets you to fluency. It just burns out because it operates on fear or obligation, they're draining emotions. The ideal self operates on hope and desire, and those are fueling emotions.
And this connects directly to the philosophy at THEIELTSFOCUS, especially in the Vietnamese context. We have a specific note from their methodology on this.
Yes, the phrase is, "Eding hint an ban den lituang ideal L2 self, ki sudong den tao tiang, anadong luknoi daiman minat."
Which translates roughly to, building the image of the ideal self when a proficient in English is the strongest internal motivation.
It's a perfect summary of Durnyai's entire theory. And what that means, for a center like THEIELTSFOCUS is that their job isn't just to teach grammar rules.
No.
Their real job is to help the students construct that visualization, to be the architect of that vision.
So when a student walks in, the teacher isn't just asking, did you do your homework? They're also asking, maybe implicitly, can you see that future version of yourself?
And helping them hold on to that vision. Because learning a language is hard.
It's a long plateau.
It is. It's filled with mistakes and frustration. And it's embarrassing to make those mistakes in front of people. The only thing that sustains a learner through what Harmer calls the hard work is the clarity of that vision.
If you can see the future you keep going.
You keep going. But if you're just doing it because your boss told you to, you quit the moment it gets really difficult. The THEIELTSFOCUS, in a way, they act as the architects for that future self.
Okay, so we have the fuel. The ideal L2 self is the fuel. But a full tank of gas doesn't matter if you don't know how to drive the car. And that brings us to section 2, learner autonomy and agency.
This is the vehicle. You can want it badly, but you need the mechanism to actually get there.
Let's define agency first, because Harmer makes a big deal about this. It's a word we hear a lot in sociology. But how does it fit in a language classroom?
Agency is the student's ability to make choices and take control. It's the fundamental difference between being a passenger in the classroom
And being the driver.
and being the driver. Harmer puts it perfectly. He says, real autonomy presupposes student agency.
Meaning, if students are only ever doing what they're told, they can never actually become autonomous.
Correct. If you just sit in class, you wait for the teacher to speak, you write down what they say, and then you leave. You have zero agency. You're just a receptacle.
A bucket being filled.
A bucket being filled. And buckets don't become fluent speakers. Fluent speakers are active. They decide what they need to learn. They notice their own gaps in their knowledge, and they take action to fill them.
But that requires a massive shift in how we view the teacher. I think traditionally, especially in a lot of Asian contexts, the teacher is the sage on the stage.
The transmitter of all knowledge, the fountain of truth, the authority figure who has all the keys.
Right. But the THEIELTSFOCUS, and this follows Harmer's modern pedagogy, they shift that role to the guide on the side.
It's a catchy little rhyme, but the pedagogical shift behind it is profound. As a guide on the side, the teacher provides resources, they provide support, they provide what we call scaffolding.
Breaking things down into smaller chunks.
Yeah, breaking complex tasks into doable chunks. But, and this is the absolute crucial part, the student has to do the walking. The teacher cannot learn the language for the student.
I love the reference here to John Field. He says true empowerment is the freedom to learn outside the teaching context.
That is the ultimate goal. I mean, the goal of a great teacher should be to make themselves obsolete.
That sounds counterintuitive.
It does, but think about it. If a student finishes your course and they still need you to explain a new word or correct a simple sentence, you've failed them in the long run.
They need the skills to engage with the language on their own.
Independently. To be able to pick up a newspaper, watch a movie, write an email, all without needing that safety net.
So what does this actually look like in practice? Because be autonomous is easy to say.
But hard to do.
Yeah. Harmer lists some specific strategies.
One of the most practical ones comes from Daniel Barber and Duncan Ford, and it's using SMART goals.
The classic corporate tool applied to linguistics.
Exactly the same thing. Specific, measurable, agreed, realistic, and time-bound. A student shouldn't just say, I want to get better at listening.
That's not a goal. It's a wish.
It's a wish. It's too vague to act on. A SMART goal would be, this week, I will listen to 3 10-minute podcasts about economics, and I will write down 5 new vocabulary words from each one.
Okay, that's specific. It's measurable.
It's realistic. And it puts the responsibility, the agency, right on the student to execute it. That is autonomous behavior in action.
And then there's this idea of digital autonomy.
Which is just huge in the modern era. We can now treat the entire internet as a living corpus.
Can you explain that term corpus?
A corpus is just a massive searchable database of text. In the old days, only researchers at big universities had access to these things to see how words were really used. Now, Google is a corpus. YouTube is a corpus.
So instead of just giving a student a list of words,
a guide on the side encourages the student to go research the language, go find how this word is used in a YouTube video, go find 3 news headlines that use this particular collocation.
It changes the dynamic from here's the answer to go find the answer.
And that process, that hunt, it creates neural pathways that passive memorization just never can. When you have to hunt for the answer, you value it more, you own it.
There's also a fascinating little exercise from a guy named Bill Littlewood mentioned in the text. It's about self-reflection.
Oh yeah, the sentence completion task. Language learning is like blank because blank.
Language learning is like a marathon because it requires endurance. Or language learning is like a puzzle because you have to fit all the pieces together.
It seems so simple, almost like a game. But it forces the student to confront their own emotional relationship with the learning process. It builds self-awareness, which you absolutely need for autonomy.
Because if a student says, language learning is like visiting the dentist because it's painful,
That tells the teacher, and more importantly, the student, that there's a motivation block there. You have to address that before you can even start talking about grammar effectively.
now we have to address the elephant in the room. This whole approach, autonomy, agency, challenging the teacher, it can run into some cultural resistance.
It can.
And the source material explicitly cites a study by Humphreys and Wyatt that was done specifically in Vietnam.
And this is a critical piece of context for THEIELTS FOCUS. The study found that Vietnamese students, at least initially, can feel quite uneasy about autonomy. There's a cultural expectation that the teacher is the authority.
So if the teacher says, you choose the topic, or you find the answer,
The student's reaction might be, wait a minute, isn't that your job? We don't know if what we're doing is good or bad.
it's a feeling of insecurity. I'm paying you to teach me. Why am I teaching myself?
Exactly. It can come across as the teacher being lazy or unstructured. So the solution, according to Harmer, isn't to force it on them overnight. You don't just throw them in the deep end.
You have to nurture it.
You nurture it. The guide on the side has to be a very proactive guide. You gently push the student to take charge of their learning outside the classroom first.
Homework, self-access centers.
Consuming English media they enjoy. You build their confidence in their own agency slowly. You prove to them, bit by bit, that they can find the answers. And once they have that moment where they think, hey, I figured that out myself and I was right, that addiction to the sage on the stage starts to break.
It transforms them from a dependent learner to an independent user.
That's the goal.
Okay, so we have the ideal L2 self driving us. We have autonomy as the vehicle to get us there. But how do we know where we are? How do we know if we're actually making progress?
A map.
This brings us to section 3, proficiency levels and the CEFR.
And this is arguably the most important standardization in the history of language teaching.
Before this, we just had these vague terms like beginner, intermediate, and advanced.
Which are completely useless.
Totally subjective. My intermediate could easily be your beginner.
Easily. Advanced to a tourist means ordering a meal without pointing at the menu. Advanced to a university professor means writing a thesis on post-structuralist philosophy. The terms meant nothing across different contexts or countries.
So the Council of Europe developed the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference.
Which breaks language ability into 6 distinct levels: A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, and C2.
Let's break those down really quickly using Harmer's definitions, because I think people get confused. It's not just a grade. It's a functional description of what you can do.
Right. So A1 is breakthrough. You can introduce yourself, ask and answer very simple personal questions. It's survival basics. You're very dependent on the listener being patient with you.
Then you move up through A2 to B1, which is called threshold.
B1 is a really significant level. It means you can deal with most situations that are likely to come up while you're traveling. You're independent, but you're not particularly nuanced.
You can get by.
You can get by, you can express opinions, but you do it simply.
Then we have the big jump to C1.
C1 is effective operational proficiency. For most professional and academic situations, this is the gold standard. It means you can express ideas fluently without obviously searching for words. You're flexible. You can joke, you can argue, you can give a presentation.
You can handle the language.
Socially, academically, professionally, yeah.
And finally, C2, mastery.
C2 is an interesting one. Harmer points out that C2 is often a higher level of analytical ability than the average native speaker uses in casual conversation. It's about differentiating finer shades of meaning in very complex situations. It's almost literary or academic mastery.
It's not just fluency, it's precision.
It's extreme precision.
So we have these codes. But what makes the CEFR psychological? Why is this in our deep dive on learner psychology?
It's because of how the levels are defined. They are not defined by what you get wrong. They're defined by what are called can-do statements.
And this is a massive shift in mindset.
It is huge. Traditional education is so often deficit-based. You made a mistake with the past tense. You forgot the preposition there. You failed to use the subjunctive mood.
Always focusing on the negative.
The CEFR flips that completely. It says, I can describe my family. I can explain a complex graph. I can summarize a short story.
It frames the entire learning process in terms of success and capability.
And the psychological impact of that is enormous. It builds what we call self-efficacy, that belief that I can do this. It also allows students to audit themselves.
How so?
Well, you can look at a list of, say, B2 can-do statements, and you can literally check them off. Yep, I can do that. Not so sure about that one yet.
It connects right back to autonomy.
Perfectly. The student becomes the owner of their own progress tracking. They don't need the teacher to tell them they're a B1. They can prove it to themselves against these clear criteria.
It turns the map into a checklist of achievements instead of a list of failures.
That's a great way to put it. Now, there is one small problem with the CEFR in terms of motivation. The jumps between levels are big.
Right. Going from a B1 to a B2 can take hundreds of hours.
And it can feel like you're just stuck on a plateau for months, and that kills motivation. It hurts that ideal L2 self we talked about.
The vision starts to fade.
It does, which is why Harmer also brings up something called the Global Scale of English, or GSE. It's a much more granular scale, running from 10 to 90.
So instead of just being stuck at B1 for 6 months, you can actually see yourself moving from a 45 to a 48 to a 52 on the scale.
Exactly. It tracks the smaller steps of progress. And biologically, our brains need those small dopamine hits of success to keep that ideal self alive and kicking. If the goal feels too far away, the vision just gets blurry. The GSE keeps the progress visible and bridges the gap between those major milestones.
Okay, so let's synthesize all of this. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's a very clear logic chain here in the THEIELTS-FOCUS methodology.
It's a complete, cohesive ecosystem. First, you have the ideal L2 self.
That's the fuel.
That's the fuel. It's the why. It's internal, it's personal, it's all about identity.
Then second, you have autonomy and agency.
And that's the vehicle. That's what shifts the student from being a passive passenger to an active driver. It empowers them to use the guide on the side, but to do the actual walking themselves.
And third is the CEFR and can-do statements.
And that's the map. It shows you exactly where you are, it frames your skills in a positive way, and it shows you exactly what the next step on the journey looks like.
It basically removes the mystery from language learning.
Yeah.
It stops being this sort of magical talent that some people have and others don't.
Yeah.
And it turns it into a structured psychological process that you can manage.
Precisely. It turns that vague feeling of I'm bad at English into the very specific and actionable statement, I am currently at an A2 level, and I'm aiming for B1 by working on these specific autonomous goals so that I can become my ideal self.
Which brings us to our final thought. We always like to leave our listeners with something to, chew on.
We do, and I want to go all the way back to identity. If we accept this premise from Harmer and Dernier, that the ideal L2 self is the single strongest motivator, stronger than any exam, stronger than pressure from your parents, then I have to ask this question.
Go on.
Are we, as learners, actually spending any time visualizing?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, we spend hours and hours staring at grammar exercises. We spend hours memorizing vocabulary lists. But do we spend even 5 minutes a day just closing our eyes and vividly imagining that future conversation? Do we visualize the specific setting, our own confidence, the feeling of not hesitating? Because if that vision is the fuel and we never stop to refill the tank, we're just pushing a car with no gas. The most successful student isn't necessarily the one with the best textbook. It's the one who has the clearest, most undeniable picture of their future self.
A vision worth fighting for. That's a wrap for this deep dive into the learner's psychology. For THEIELTS-FOCUS, keep visualizing, keep driving, and check your map. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
So today, we're really digging into the methodology of Jeremy Harmer, and specifically, we're looking at his big work, the practice of English language teaching. But this isn't just, a book report. We're really trying to tackle a fundamental tension. I think it's a tension that exists in pretty much every classroom.
Yeah.
It's that battle between structure and freedom.
It is the classic dilemma, isn't it? I mean, how do you give enough structure so that your students feel safe, so they actually learn the rules?
Right.
But then also give them enough freedom so they aren't just parroting back what Someone like Scott Thornbury calls grammar McNuggets.
Grammar McNuggets, that's good.
It's all about finding that sweet spot. That's where the learning actually, sticks.
Exactly. So our focus today is Harmer's ESA model, but maybe even more importantly, how to break out of that traditional mold with something he calls the boomerang sequence.
Right.
And tied to that, we have to figure out how to tell a student they're wrong without, crushing their soul. Which brings us to feedback.
Yeah, the whole complex world of feedback.
So the mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We're trying to move away from that sort of industrial lecture-style teaching, the old PPP.
The old PPP, presentation, practice, production. It's the factory model, really.
What do you mean by factory model?
Where you just sort of bolt the knowledge onto the student. It's very linear. We're looking at how to shift towards something more organic.
Okay.
Models where the students are the ones doing the work, making the mistakes, and then actually learning from those mistakes.
It's a real shift, then, from the teacher as a kind of broadcaster to the teacher as a facilitator.
A guide, yeah.
But before we get to the really advanced stuff, the sequencing, let's just unpack that core acronym. The thing at the center of Harmer's philosophy, ESA.
ESA. Engage, study, activate. 3 simple words.
Sounds simple.
They sound simple, but they carry a massive amount of weight if you actually apply them correctly.
Yeah.
And I have to say, most people get the first one wrong right out of the gate.
Yeah. Okay, let's start there. Engage. I think most teachers, especially new teachers, think this just means being polite, saying hello, asking how are you, maybe taking attendance.
Right, or checking homework. That's just administrative maintenance. It's classroom management. It's not engagement.
So what is it then?
Engagement, for Harmer, is about emotional involvement. It's the spark. He's really adamant that if the students aren't hooked, the learning just bounces off.
It's almost biological, right? We're talking about the affective filter here.
Precisely. The brain isn't just a hard drive where you write data onto it. It has a gatekeeper.
And that gatekeeper is emotion.
Emotion and interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. If a student is bored or zoned out or, thinking about lunch.
Which happens.
All the time.
Yeah.
The synaptic connections for memory, they just don't form as well. You have to lower that barrier. You have to open the gate.
So engage is that phase where you'd use pictures or stories or maybe a shocking statistic, anything to get that emotional buy-in.
Yes. Just think about the difference in energy. Option A, a teacher walks into a room and says, okay, today we will study the past simple tense.
Right. Half the room just went to sleep.
Instantly. You've lost them before you've even picked up the marker. Now, compare that to option B. You walk in, you show a picture of some kind of disaster, a car crash, a ruined wedding cake.
Something dramatic.
Yeah, and you just ask, what happened here?
And suddenly there's curiosity. The brain just naturally wants to solve that puzzle.
Exactly. You are hijacking their natural curiosity to drive the whole lesson. You're creating a context where they want to know the answer.
Okay.
And once that door is open, and only when that door is open, can you move to the S study.
This part feels like what we're all used to. This is the teaching part, the nuts and bolts.
In a way, yes. This is where you focus on construction, the mechanics of the language.
Like intonation, grammar.
Intonation patterns, relative clauses, specific grammar rules. Yeah. But Harmer makes a really, really important distinction here. Study doesn't always mean the teacher standing at the board and lecturing while the students take notes.
Right. This is the deductive versus inductive thing. And that difference is crucial if you want to keep that engagement we just built.
Correct. Deductive is the traditional way. Here is the rule. Now apply it.
It's efficient.
It can be efficient, but it's very passive. It treats the student like a receptacle. Inductive is. It's just so much more powerful for many learners.
And inductive is.
Here's a text. It's full of examples. You tell me what the rule is.
So you're making the student into a detective.
Exactly. You give them the evidence, they have to figure out the law.
Yeah.
But in either case, whether you give them a rule or they find it, the focus of the study phase is accuracy. We want them to understand how the machine works.
And that brings us to the last letter, A, activate. And I think this is where the biggest confusion is, especially for new teachers. How is activate any different from just practicing what they just studied?
This is such a vital distinction. The activate stage is where the training wheels have to come off.
Okay.
It's completely distinct from practice in the study phase. In study, you might do drills.
Like repeat after me.
Repeat after me, fill in the blank, change this sentence from present to past. That is all controlled practice. The focus there is on form. That is not activation.
So activation is about using the language freely.
It's communicative. It's meaning over form. This is where you do role plays, debates, reading for pleasure, writing a story. The student has to use everything they know.
Not just the new grammar.
No, not just the grammar point of the day. They have to use everything in their linguistic arsenal to get a message across.
So quick check. If they're just doing a worksheet conjugating verbs, that's study.
Definitely study.
But if they're arguing about which movie to go see tonight,
That's activate. Because in the activate phase, they aren't trying to show you they know a specific rule. They're trying to survive a communication situation.
they're focused on the outcome.
The outcome of the conversation, not the grammar of each sentence.
Yeah. Now, the way most of us were taught, and honestly the way a lot of textbooks are still written, it follows a very predictable sequence with these three parts. It's called the straight arrow sequence.
Straight arrow sequence. Engage, then study, then activate. ESA. It just flows in a straight line.
You get them interested, you teach them the rule, and then you have them use the rule.
Right.
It sounds logical, it sounds safe.
It's very safe. It perfectly mirrors that PPP method we mentioned, presentation, practice, production. And for a new teacher, or maybe a very low-level class, it works.
It gives them a scaffold.
It does. It feels organized. But it relies on a potentially very flawed assumption.
And what's that assumption?
It assumes that students are blank slates, that they're just waiting to be filled up with information before they can do anything. It assumes this, like, linear progression.
The idea that you have to know the theory before you can even attempt the practice?
Exactly. It assumes they can't swim until you've given them a full lecture on fluid dynamics.
That is a perfect analogy. The straight arrows approach says, okay, first, let's study the physics of water, then we'll practice arm movements on dry land, and then, maybe, we'll get in the pool.
Right. But we all know sometimes the best way to learn is to just jump in the deep end.
And that brings us to the boomerang sequence. This is where it gets really interesting, and I think where Harmer really challenges us to rethink the whole order of operations in the classroom.
The boomerang sequence completely shuffles the deck. So instead of ESA, we go EASA.
EASA.
Engage, activate, study, and then activate again.
Okay, hold on. Let's pause right there. So we engage them, get them hooked on the topic, and then we immediately throw them into an activate phase.
Immediately.
Before we've taught them the grammar, before the vocabulary.
Yes. You throw them into the task right away. This is the deep end approach. You completely bypass the initial explanation and go straight to the doing.
Can you give us a concrete example of what that looks like? Because that sounds, frankly, terrifying for a new teacher who's used to being in control.
It does require some nerve, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's say your goal is to teach formal interview language.
Okay.
In a straight arrows lesson, you'd teach all the polite phrases first. I would be delighted to, could you tell me about, etc. And then at the end, have them do a mock interview.
The safe way.
The safe way. In a boomerang lesson, you engage them with the topic of jobs, maybe show a funny clip of a bad interview, or discuss their dream jobs.
Get them hooked.
And then you immediately say, okay, get in pairs. One of you is the boss, one is the applicant. Do the interview. Go.
It's going to be a disaster.
It might be.
They don't know the formal language yet. They're going to be saying things like, I want a job, or give me money, instead of I'd like to apply for the position.
It might be a disaster, yes.
Yeah.
They might use slang, they might stumble, they might use the wrong tense. But that disaster is the entire point.
It creates a need.
Exactly. It creates a diagnostic gap. The teacher isn't just teaching into a void anymore. The teacher's watching and listening. You're observing what they can't do.
I see.
You see them reaching for a word they don't have. You see them making a specific grammatical error because they're trying to express a complex idea. You're collecting data on their actual needs, not their theoretical ones.
So the study phase, which comes third in the sequence, isn't just today's topic. It's language repair.
Ideally, yes. You stop the activity. You say, okay, I saw a lot of you were struggling to ask about salary politely. You were saying, give me money. Let's study how to do that better. Now the students are listening in a completely different way.
The psychology is totally different.
They aren't listening because it's on the syllabus. They are listening because they just failed at a task and they want the tool to fix it.
Right.
The motivation problem is solved instantly. They have solved the gap, so they want the bridge.
And it's so much more efficient. I mean, why teach them things they might already know?
Exactly. If they do that first activate task and they handle all the greetings perfectly, you don't need to teach greetings. You can just skip it.
So the first A shows you the hole.
It shows you the specific holes in their knowledge, and you just fill the holes rather than repaving the entire street.
There's a specific concept here that's really vital for our listeners to understand, especially for how this model functions.
Yes, for our Vietnamese listeners, this is the core idea you need to hold on to for this methodology. It's this. Mon hin boomerang cho phepok, vien thuk, trok de fation lohong kientuk, sau de moi hokli diete swacho.
Okay, let's just make sure everyone catches the nuance there. Let's break that down.
The absolute essence of it is that the boomerang model allows students to practice first in order to detect their own knowledge gaps. And only then do they study the theory to fix those specific gaps.
So it puts practice before theory. It really prioritizes the diagnostic power of just doing something.
Yes.
And the sequence doesn't stop with the study phase. It boomerangs back.
Right. It goes EAS and then A again. Reactivation. You have to let them get back in the water.
Okay.
Say, okay, now that we've studied these polite phrases, do the interview again.
And that second attempt, I mean, that must feel incredibly satisfying for the student.
It creates such a tangible sense of progress. They can see, in real time, 10 minutes ago I couldn't do this, and now I can.
Right.
That builds confidence so much more effectively than just getting a worksheet correct. It bridges that gap between knowing about the language and actually using it. They leave the class feeling capable.
But this approach, it really requires a teacher who is comfortable with messiness.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when you throw them into that first activate phase, they are going to make mistakes. A lot of them.
And that brings us perfectly to the next crucial pillar of Harmer's teaching, the nature of mistakes.
Yeah, we have to completely reframe how we view errors. In a traditional classroom, an error is a failure. It's a red mark on a page. It's something to be avoided at all costs.
But in the communicative classroom, and especially in a model like the boomerang, an error is just data.
It's evidence.
It's evidence that learning is happening. But, and this is key, not all mistakes are created equal. Harmer pulls from Julian Edge's framework here, which is just brilliant for categorizing what we're hearing. You have to know why the student made the mistake before you can even think about fixing it.
Okay, let's break down Edge's categories. The first one he calls slips.
A slip is what happens to all of us, even in our native language. It's just a mistake you make because of pressure or speed or your brain is just overloaded.
So the defining characteristic of a slip is that the student actually knows the rule.
Yes, they know it. So if the student says he go to the store,
Yeah.
but they know perfectly well it should be he goes, that's a slip.
And you can tell because if I just raise an eyebrow at them or say again,
And they immediately correct it to he goes was, then you know it was a slip. You didn't need to teach the grammar. You just needed to give them a little nudge. Their brain just went a bit faster than their mouth. The system is there. It just misfired.
so the teacher's response to a slip should be really minimal.
No, very minimal. Don't launch into a big lecture on the third person singular as. You'll bore them, and frankly, you'll kind of insult their intelligence. They know it.
Just signal it and move on.
Don't break the flow for a slip. Ever.
Okay, then we have the second category, errors. This feels heavier.
An error is different. An error is caused by a genuine lack of knowledge. There is a gap in the student's interlanguage.
Interlanguage being their current evolving mental version of English.
Exactly. So using that same example, if a student says he go to the store and you say again, and they just look at you with a blank stare,
Then it's probably an error.
it's an error. They can't self-correct because they literally do not know the rule yet. They think he go is correct.
So no amount of nudging is going to help.
Raising your eyebrow just makes them nervous. This requires study. This requires an explanation. This is where the teacher actually has to step in and provide the missing knowledge.
So just knowing the difference between a slip and an error tells you whether to nod and move on or stop and teach.
Precisely. And then there's the third category, attempts.
Attempts. This sounds more positive.
Attempts are my favorite, honestly. This is when a student tries to say something really complex, something way beyond their current level, and they just mangle the language to do it. They don't have the grammar, but they have the desire to communicate a really big idea.
These have to be seen as positive signs, right? Even if the sentence itself is a total wreck.
Extremely positive. They are signs of risk-taking,
Yeah.
of hypothesis testing. If a student makes a complete mess of a sentence because they're trying to explain, I don't know, a complex political philosophy with only 200 words in their vocabulary, that's an attempt.
And you don't want to shut that down.
Never.
Yeah.
You applaud the ambition and then you help them find the tools. You don't penalize it.
There's also this idea of developmental errors, things like a child saying, I go to the store instead of I went.
Yes. Go-ed is a beautiful mistake. It's wonderful
Why is it beautiful?
because it shows the student has learned the rule added for past tense, and they're overgeneralizing it. It proves their brain is working. It proves they're building a system.
Right.
If you punish Go-ed too harshly, you might stop them from trying to find the patterns in the first place. You want to guide that system, not crush it. You validate the logic. Yes, usually 8 is right, and then you teach the exception. But Go is a special one.
So understanding all these categories it's essential because it dictates your feedback. And feedback is probably the trickiest part of the activate phase, especially in that boomerang model.
It is the ultimate dilemma for a teacher.
Yeah.
It's accuracy versus fluency. It's a constant seesaw.
If you stop every single mistake to correct it, the communication just dies. This is the interruption problem.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine you're trying to tell a story at a dinner party,
Right.
and someone stops you every 3 words to correct your grammar. It's whom, not who.
I would just stop talking.
You'd disengage, you'd hate that person, and students hate it too. It destroys the flow, it destroys their confidence. But if you never correct them, you get something called fossilization.
Right. Where the error just hardens like concrete. If a student says, he go for 3 years and no one ever corrects it because they don't want to interrupt.
It becomes fossilized.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly difficult to fix later on. So the teacher has to walk this tightrope. You have to correct enough to prevent fossilization, but not so much that you kill the communication.
And Harmer suggests a really specific technique for this, especially during those activate phases. It's called reformulation.
Reformulation is a kind of gentle correction. It's a way to keep the conversation going while at the same time providing the correct model. It's almost like a stealth correction.
How does that actually work? What's the mechanism?
So the mechanism is the teacher listens, understands the meaning of what the student is saying, and then repeats the student's utterance back to them, but in the correct form.
Okay, let's use the example from the source text. A student says, she said me, I was late. That's a super common error.
Very common. Now, a bad correction, a very teacher mode correction, would be to say, stop. No, we don't say said me. We say told me. Repeat after me.
Kills the vibe. The student feels stupid. The conversation is dead.
Exactly. A reformulation would be for the teacher to just smile and say, oh, so she told you you were late, did she?
I see. So you're validating the content. I heard your story, but you're just slipping in the grammar correction.
Exactly. You are validating the meaning while fixing the form. It's non-intrusive. It keeps the ball in the air. You're acting like a conversational partner, not a judge. It's actually how parents often correct children when they're learning their first language.
But there is a critique of this method, isn't there? It's not a silver bullet.
No, it's not. The biggest danger is that the student is so focused on the meaning, they're just happy you understood them, that they completely miss the correction.
They just don't notice it.
They hear told you, but their brain just registers it as, yes, the teacher understands me. They don't notice the grammar shift. They might just nod and then continue making the same mistake 5 minutes later.
Despite that risk, it's a vital tool to have. And for our listeners, we've got another specific definition to really lock this concept in.
Correct. For the Vietnamese context, you should understand reformulation this way. Reformulation là khi thua chào viên lặp lại câu qua học viên một cách chính xác và tự nhiên do học viên tu nan ra sa imahon bian quang.
That last part, Hong Biang a Quang, that means without being interrupted. That feels like the key.
That is the absolute key. It maintains the flow. It prioritizes the relationship and the communication over the pedantry of grammar. It respects the student's voice.
So besides reformulation, what are some other low intervention feedback cues that Harmer talks about? Sometimes you just want to give a tiny signal.
There's echoing with intonation. So if a student says, Flight 309, go to Paris, the teacher can just echo back, Flight 309, go to Paris, with a rising, questioning tone.
You're not saying that's wrong. You're just highlighting the error with your voice and asking, are you sure about that part?
Exactly. You're just spotlighting it. You're not explaining it. You're just pointing a little flashlight at it. And it puts the ball back in the student's court to try and self-correct. If they can, it was just a slip.
And facial expressions, gestures. The silent teacher can be so effective here.
Absolutely. A simple quizzical look or counting words on your fingers to show that a word is missing, like an auxiliary verb.
How does that work?
If a student says, he going, you could just hold up 3 fingers and tap the middle space to indicate that it is missing. It's silent, it's visual, and it doesn't stop them from finishing their thought. It's like a conductor giving you a cue.
I like that. And then there's delayed feedback, which seems like it was made for the boomerang model.
Delayed feedback is often the best choice for any activate phase. The teacher basically becomes a scribe. You walk around the room while students are doing their role plays or their tasks, and you just take notes.
You write down the good stuff and the common errors.
Right. And you don't say a word while they're working.
You just let them work.
You let them struggle, you let them flow. Then, when the activity is finished, you put some of those sentences on the board. You say, okay, great job, everyone. I heard these 5 sentences. Which ones are correct? Which ones need a little fixing?
That's great. It separates the performer from the critic.
It does. And it saves the student from that public embarrassment in the moment. You're analyzing the language almost anonymously after the fact. It turns the errors into a class puzzle, not a personal failure.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. Connecting this back to the bigger picture, we're talking about moving from a rigid structure to a much more flexible one.
We are connecting the boomerang model directly to the nature of feedback. You simply cannot run an effective boomerang lesson where you ask students to perform first if you don't know how to handle the inevitable mistakes that will result.
So the boomerang model actually relies on the teacher's ability to spot the difference between an error and a slip during that first task.
That is the whole synthesis. That first activate in the boomerang sequence is a diagnostic test. If the teacher can't tell the difference between a slip, which they can ignore, and an error, which needs to be the focus of the study phase,
then the whole study session will be useless.
completely. You'll end up teaching things they already know, or worse, ignoring things they desperately need help with.
And if you correct them too harshly during that first phase using the wrong techniques, they won't want to do the second activate phase.
Precisely. The old model was about preventing mistakes. We used to think, if I just teach it well enough, my students won't make mistakes. Harmer is saying, no, that's wrong.
He's saying to structure the lesson so that mistakes happen.
So they happen early. Mistakes are the raw material for learning.
Use the boomerang structure to generate those mistakes, and then use smart feedback like reformulation and a targeted study phase to shape them into correct language.
It really shifts the teacher from being a broadcaster of information to being a guide who helps the student navigate their own confusion.
It puts a lot more responsibility on the teacher to be alert, though, doesn't it? You really have to be thinking on your feet.
You do. You're constantly observing, analyzing, and deciding, is that an error? Is it a slip? Do I interrupt now? Do I write it down and wait? It's happening in real time. It's demanding, but it creates a classroom that is alive.
A laboratory, not a lecture hall.
That's it, exactly.
So, to wrap this up, here's the thought we really want to leave you with. It's a bit of a provocation for your own teaching practice.
We want you to look back at your last few lessons and ask yourself, are you teaching too much before you test? Are you explaining everything up front because you're afraid of your students failing?
And when you do give feedback, does your correction silence the student or does it guide them?
Are you fixing the sentence? Or are you helping the student fix their own sentence? The difference there is everything.
Think about that the next time you step into the classroom. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
So the source material we're diving into today is, it's a big one. It's Jeremy Harmer's The Practice of English Language Teaching.
It's massive.
Yeah.
Dense.
Right. And honestly, it's pretty much considered the Bible for anyone who's really serious about the mechanics of, how we actually learn languages.
Oh, absolutely. And not just Harmer. The supporting texts we have here, people like Scrivener, Richards. This isn't just a pile of teaching tricks.
No.
It's a deep deconstruction of how the human brain actually processes, holds on to, and then, produces a new language.
And that is exactly what we're doing in this deep dive. We are cutting out all the fluff today.
Straight to the point.
Straight to the machinery of it all.
Uh-huh.
We're going to break this down into 3 very specific pillars that come up again and again in the research.
Yeah.
First, the mechanics of understanding. How we process what we're reading and hearing.
Your receptive skills.
Exactly. Then, second, the science of accuracy. There's a specific technique here called transcription that I really want to get into.
That one's fascinating.
And third, the modern reality of pronunciation. What should our goal actually be? What should we aim to sound like?
And what I really love about this whole body of research is how much it pushes back against our own intuition as learners.
What do you mean?
I mean, we all kind of think learning a language is about flashcards and grammar rules, just memorizing things.
Right, just brute force.
But Harmer and these other writers, they argue it's much more about how you manage your attention, how you use the knowledge you already have in your head.
That's a great way to put it. So let's start with that first pillar then, receptive skills.
Reading and listening.
And when I was looking through Harmer, and especially the work by Nuttall, they kept talking about this duality. Two completely different ways the brain comes at language.
Yes, this is the big one. It's the difference between bottom-up processing and top-down processing.
Okay.
And look, understanding this difference is, I think, one of the most critical things for any learner. Because most of us, we lean way too heavily on one and we basically ignore the other.
So let's unpack that. Let's start with bottom up. The sources kept calling it the magnifying glass approach.
That's the perfect metaphor for it. Bottom-up processing is when you start with the tiniest possible pieces of the language.
Like the atoms of it.
Exactly. If you're listening, you're trying to decode every single individual sound, the phonemes. If you're reading, you're literally looking at the letters, building them into syllables, then building those into words.
And then stringing the words into a sentence to get the meaning.
Right. And Harmer has this great analogy for it. He says it's like building a wall, one brick at a time.
You lay one brick, then the next, and eventually you have a wall.
You're assembling the meaning from the ground up, piece by painful piece.
Which, I mean, that sounds logical, doesn't it? You have to have the individual parts to understand the whole thing.
It sounds perfectly logical, but here's the problem, and every source is crystal clear on this. Relying only on bottom-up processing is a complete disaster for fluency.
A disaster. That's a strong word.
It is, because it's mentally exhausting. It is just unbelievably inefficient.
The text gave an example that really hit home for me about reading a novel. Something like Harry Potter.
Yes.
Imagine trying to read a 100-page book where for every single sentence you had to consciously decode each letter to form the word, then each word to form the phrase.
You'd be totally paralyzed. The cognitive load, the amount of brain power it takes is just too high.
You'd get to the end of a long sentence and have no memory of how it started.
None. Because your brain was so focused on processing the individual bricks that you completely missed the design of the building. You're so obsessed with the bark on the trees, you don't even realize you're in a forest.
Okay, so that's bottom up, the magnifying glass. Incredibly detailed, but slow and exhausting.
Right.
So the alternative is top-down processing. And the sources call this one the eagle's eye.
The eagle's eye. And top-down is, well, it's just fascinating because it's not about what's on the page. It's about what's already in your head.
It's about using what you already know.
Precisely. It's about activating what the researchers call schemata.
Schemata. That feels like a really key term here.
Oh, it's everything. A schema is, it's basically a mental movie script. Or think of it like a file folder in your brain that holds all your background knowledge about a certain topic or situation.
Okay, so it's like a mental template.
A template, exactly. The sources give this brilliant example comparing two kinds of restaurants.
Right, the fine dining at a French restaurant versus grabbing a burger at McDonald's.
Perfect. So if I tell you we're going to a fancy French restaurant, your brain doesn't just sit there waiting for data. It immediately opens the fancy French restaurant schema.
And so you start expecting certain things.
You expect a waiter, a cloth napkin, probably a wine list, different courses. You are actively predicting that someone will probably ask, do you have a reservation?
So you don't even need to hear every single sound in that sentence perfectly to understand it.
Not at all, because you're expecting it. Your brain has already laid out the map.
Whereas if you say we're off to McDonald's,
the schema is totally different. You expect a counter, a big menu board up high, a plastic tray, and you're predicting the question, for here or to go?
Right.
That's top-down processing. It's using that pre-existing map, that schema, to predict meaning. You're not just decoding the raw data brick by brick. You're actively confirming your expectations.
Which lets you process everything so much faster.
Infinitely faster. Because you aren't doing all the heavy lifting in real time.
There's a really specific example in the text about contextual clues that, for me, just made this whole thing click. It's the ship versus sheep problem.
The classic minimal pair. A nightmare for so many learners.
Yeah, and students, they get obsessed with hearing that tiny difference between the short I in ship and the long E in sheep.
They do. They think it's all about bottom up. Can my ears detect this tiny sound difference?
But the source points out that in a real sentence, like the president is on the ship, you don't actually need to hear that vowel sound perfectly.
No, you really don't, because top-down processing just kicks in instantly.
Your logic takes over.
Your logic, your schema for presidents and transportation, your basic background knowledge of the world. It tells you that presidents are generally not found standing on top of farm animals.
So it has to be ship.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Even if the speaker's pronunciation is a little unclear or there's some noise in the background, your brain hears the word ship because it's the only thing that makes logical sense in that context.
You're using the big picture to fill in the gaps in the details.
That's the perfect summary of it.
So we've got these two modes, bottom up, the detailed analysis, the magnifying glass, and top down, the big picture prediction, the eagle's eye. So the inevitable question is, which one is better?
And the answer, which all sources give emphatically, is neither.
Either.
Or, maybe a better way to put it is the answer is both. This is what the research calls the interactive approach.
And I found this interesting. This is actually a core philosophy for the center we're looking at, THEIELTSFOCUS. They are very explicit about teaching students that you cannot just rely on one.
You can't. They're both tools, and you need to know when to use each one. If you rely only on top-down, you're just guessing all the time.
You'll get the main idea, maybe, but you'll miss all the important details.
You'll miss the nuance, the specifics, you'll assume you know what's being said. But if you rely only on bottom-up,
You get that processing overload we talked about. You're so busy with the books, you lose the main idea entirely.
you need synergy. It has to be a dance between the two. Top-down gives you the map, but bottom-up provides the crucial details on that map.
There's a very specific Vietnamese principle that the center uses to define this idea. I really want to quote it directly because it sums it all up perfectly.
Let's hear it.
It's Kết hợp kỹ năng duy trình, top down, và phân tích chi tiết, bottom up, là chia core để đan thao nghi đọc.
And that is the absolute core message. For our listeners, that translates to something like combining the skill of understanding the main idea, which is top-down, and detailed analysis, which is bottom-up, is the key to mastering listening and reading.
It's not an either-or choice.
It is a both-and requirement.
It really reminds me of that fantastic quote from Nuttall in the source material. She compares reading to constantly shifting your perspective.
Oh, I love that one. She says a good reader is like a scientist with a microscope 1 second.
Staring at a specific word, a complex grammar structure.
And then, the very next second, they're an eagle surveying the entire landscape, looking at the overall argument, the structure of the text, where it's all going.
The mastery isn't in being good at one or the other.
No, the mastery is in the fluidity. It's in knowing how to switch between those two modes effortlessly.
Okay, so that really clarifies how we receive information. We need to use the whole brain, the detail-oriented part, and the big picture predictive part.
Exactly.
So let's pivot to the second pillar, output, speaking.
Right. And this is where things get really, really interesting because we immediately run into a problem that Harmer and pretty much all the other researchers talk about.
Yeah, what's that?
It's what they call the fluency versus accuracy trap.
Oh, I think every single language learner knows this feeling.
Absolutely. You reach this certain stage where you can, keep a conversation going. You're fluent in the sense that you're not pausing every 2 seconds searching for a word.
The conversation flows. But
you are barely comprehensible. Or, you're just making the same basic grammatical mistakes over and over and over again.
they've fossilized?
They've completely fossilized. The sources describe it as this plateau where the learner rightly prioritizes keeping the conversation moving, but in doing so, they completely stop fixing their own errors.
Which is a huge problem. You're practicing your mistakes.
You are cementing them. So the question is, how do you break out of that plateau?
And the sources seem to propose this very specific, and I have to say kind of rigorous technique called transcription.
Yes, this comes a lot from Thomas Stone's research and, of course, Harmer's analysis of it. And it is a technique that is designed, really, to force you to confront your own mistakes.
So walk us through the process here. Because it's not as simple as just record yourself and listen back, is it?
No, not at all. It's much more structured. There are 3 very clear steps. Step 1, you record yourself speaking.
Okay.
This could be anything. A role play, a practice IELTS speaking test, even just you talking about your day for 2 minutes.
That's the easy part. Everyone's got a voice recorder on their phone.
Step 2 is the hard part, the part nobody wants to do. You have to listen to your own recording and write down exactly what you said.
Oh.
Not what you wanted to say, not what you meant to say, but the actual words that came out of your mouth. Every single missence on a verb, every wrong tense.
You have to create a perfect verbatim transcript of your own speech.
Yes.
That sounds incredibly cringy. I mean,
Yeah.
listening to your own voice is bad enough for most people, but writing down all your mistakes.
It is painful. It can be excruciating. But that pain, that discomfort, that is precisely where the learning happens.
And what's step 3?
Step 3 is the analysis. You take that written transcript and you become your own teacher. You take a red pen to your own speech and you self-correct. Oh, I missed an article there. Wow, I used the past tense here, but I should have used the present perfect.
So why is this so much more powerful than just, having a teacher correct you in the moment and say, hey, you made a mistake?
Because it's all about what the sources call the gap.
The gap.
The gap. When you're speaking in the moment, you have a version of the sentence in your head, your intention. And we usually think that's what we said.
We assume the output matched the intention.
We do. But very often, what actually comes out of our mouth is a broken, messy version of that intention. Transcription forces you to physically see in black and white the gap between what you intended to produce and what you actually produced.
And that idea connects directly to a huge theory mentioned in the text, right? Richard Schmidt's noticing hypothesis.
Yes, Schmidt's theory is fundamental to all of this. He makes this absolutely critical distinction between input and intake.
Okay, let's define those terms. Input is just all the language we hear or see.
Exactly. Input is everything you're exposed to. You can have the TV on in English all day long. That's input. But intake is the stuff that actually sticks.
The stuff that gets learned.
The stuff that becomes part of your internal language system. And Schmidt's core argument is that input only becomes intake if you consciously notice it.
So I could hear a correct grammar structure 1,000 times, but if my brain doesn't actively, consciously notice, oh, look, they said have been doing there, not was doing, then I won't actually learn it.
Precisely. You have to pay attention to the form itself. And what is transcription? It's basically a machine for generating noticing moments about your own speech.
You can't ignore the error when it's written down right in front of you.
You're forced to confront the reality of your own grammar, your own word choice. It makes the gap impossible to ignore.
But does it actually work? Does it lead to real improvement? Or does it just, make you feel terrible about your English?
Well, maybe a little of both. No, but seriously, the research from Thomas Stones on this is incredibly encouraging.
What did he find?
He found that when students went through this process record, transcribe, correct, and then, crucially, immediately repeated the original speaking task, they performed significantly better the second time around.
They improved right away.
Immediately. And this is what the researchers call uptake.
Uptake. So that's the next step in the chain.
Yes. The full chain is input leads to noticing, which leads to intake, which finally leads to uptake.
And uptake is when you actually start using the correct form in your own speech.
It's when you incorporate that correction into your future production. You don't just know it's wrong in theory, you actually start saying it right.
The sources also draw a really neat parallel here to a teaching method called community language learning, or CLL.
Yes, CLL has this really fascinating technique they call the human computer.
The human computer.
The teacher basically acts like a computer. The student tries to say something in the target language, maybe it's a bit broken or grammatically incorrect. The teacher then, in a very neutral, non-judgmental tone, simply repeats the student's idea back to them, but in perfectly correct English.
Oh, I see. So the student gets to hear their own intended message, but in a perfect form.
Exactly. And the student can ask the computer to repeat it as many times as they want. It's a way for the learner to self-correct by comparing their own production to a perfect model.
Which is very similar to comparing your own messy transcript to a corrected version.
It's the same principle. It's all about empowering the learner to spot the gap themselves, rather than just being passively told you're wrong.
I really like that. It completely shifts the dynamic. It's not the teacher grading you, it's you analyzing your own data.
And that self-analysis, that noticing, is the only sustainable way to bridge that gap between being fluent and being accurate. You have to become aware of the details to fix them.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. So let's move to our third and final pillar. We've talked about how to understand things with top-down and bottom-up. We've covered how to improve accuracy with transcription.
Right.
Now let's talk about how we should sound. Pronunciation.
Ah, yes. The source of so much anxiety for so many learners.
And totally. So many students are just obsessed with this idea of getting a perfect accent. And that usually means trying to sound exactly like a native speaker from, say, London or New York.
It's the holy grail for a lot of people.
But the sources we're looking at, especially Brown and Harmer, they seem to think this whole pursuit is a bit of a trap.
It's a massive trap. For two big reasons. First, they argue that for an adult learner, achieving a completely accent-free, native-like pronunciation is, for most people, virtually unattainable.
It's just too hard.
It's incredibly difficult. But more importantly, their second point is that it's completely unnecessary.
Unnecessary. Now, that is a bold statement.
It is, but think about the global reality of English today. We live in a world of what linguists call world Englishes.
Not just one English.
Not at all. And the statistics are clear. The vast majority of conversations in English that happen on this planet today are between two non-native speakers.
A business person from Vietnam talking to an engineer from Germany, and they're using English as the bridge.
Exactly. So in that conversation, if neither of them is a native speaker, why on earth should the goal be to sound like someone from Ohio or Manchester?
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. The goal shouldn't be native-like. The goal, they argue, should be intelligibility.
Intelligibility. A much more practical goal.
It just means, can you be understood without causing strain or effort for your listener? That's it.
Brown has this line in the source material that I just love. He says, accent is just part of your charm.
It's a great line. As long as your accent isn't actually blocking the meaning from getting through, it's not a problem. It's just a part of your identity.
But, okay, there have to be some standards, right? We can't just say anything goes or communication would break down.
No. Absolutely not. And this is where the research gets incredibly practical and useful. We have to talk about the concept of the lingua franca core, the LFC.
The lingua franca core. This comes from researchers like Jennifer Jenkins and Robin Walker, right?
Yes. And their work is brilliant. They basically analyzed countless interactions between non-native speakers to figure out what pronunciation features actually cause communication problems and which ones don't.
So they're separating the stuff that really matters from the stuff that's just nice to have.
Precisely. They distinguish between core features and non-core features. Core features are the things that, if you get them wrong, communication is very likely to break down. They are critical for intelligibility.
So give us an example of a core feature. What's on that must-have list?
Consonant clusters are a huge one. For example, the star sound in a word like street.
Okay.
In many languages, that kind of three-consonant cluster doesn't exist. So learners might drop the es and say treat, or add a vowel and say a street.
Yeah.
That can really confuse a listener and block understanding. That's a core feature. Sentence stress is another big one. Emphasizing the right word in a sentence to signal the most important information. That's critical for meaning.
All right, so those are the non-negotiables. What about the non-core stuff? What are some things we can maybe relax about a little?
This is where it gets surprising for a lot of learners and even teachers. For example, the T sound.
VT. That's like the classic English sound.
It is, but Jenkins' research found that in international contexts, it's largely a non-core feature. If you substitute it with a D or a Z sound saying dis instead of this, most people understand you perfectly fine.
Wow. Okay. What else is non-core?
Things like specific native intonation patterns, the unique melody of British or American speech. You don't need to mimic that rise and fall perfectly to be understood globally.
And what about the schwa, that little neutral sound that teachers are always drilling?
Jenkins and Walker suggest that perfecting the schwa is a nice to have, but it's not critical. It's not part of the lingua franca core. You can use a full vowel sound instead of a schwa and still be perfectly intelligible.
Robin Walker, in the text, he lays out 3 possible pronunciation goals for a learner. I think this framework is really helpful for people to think about.
Yes, it clarifies the options. Goal 1 is what we've been talking about, sounding like a native.
The perfectionist goal.
Right. And he points out this is incredibly high difficulty and often a very low return on investment. It takes thousands of hours for a result that doesn't necessarily make you a better global communicator.
Okay, what's goal 2?
Goal 2 is communicating with native speakers. This is more specific. If your primary goal is to move to the US or the UK, for example, you might need to adjust your pronunciation to be easily understood by the local population who might not be as accustomed to foreign accents.
That makes sense. It's context dependent. And goal 3?
Goal 3 is what he calls the modern standard, English as a lingua franca, or ELF.
So the goal here is just clear global communication.
Exactly. It's about being understood without effort by that German engineer, that Brazilian manager, that Vietnamese business person. That's the target audience.
So the big takeaway here for both teachers and students is to stop wasting so much time and energy on the vanity metrics of pronunciation.
That's a great way to put it. Focus your limited time and energy on fixing the errors that actually block communication, the core LFC features. Don't spend 100 hours trying to perfect your th sound if your consonant clusters are still a mess.
prioritize intelligibility over prestige.
Always. It's a very pragmatic approach. It treats English for what it is in the 21st century, a global tool, not a piece of performance art.
And that really brings us full circle, doesn't it? All three of these pillars we've discussed, receptive skills, transcription, pronunciation, they're all about working smarter, not just harder.
They're all about efficiency and awareness.
Let's just do a quick recap. First, receptive skills. It's not about decoding every single letter and sound.
No, you have to use your whole brain. It's about the synergy, combining the magnifying glass of bottom-up processing with the eagle's eye of top-down prediction. Use your schemata to do some of the work for you.
Then second, speaking. Just being fluent isn't enough if you're cementing bad habits you can't even hear.
Right. You have to use a technique like transcription to force yourself to notice your own mistakes. You record, you write it down, you correct it. You turn that raw input into learned intake and finally into active uptake.
You close that gap between what you think you're saying and what's actually coming out.
You have to.
And finally, pronunciation. We need to abandon the myth of the perfect native speaker accent.
And instead aim for intelligibility. We focus on the lingua franca core, the sounds that truly matter for clarity, and we learn to accept that our accent is just a part of our identity and not some defect that needs to be erased.
It really reframes the whole learning process. It makes it feel so much more achievable. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be strategic about how you process and produce the language.
Absolutely. It moves the goalpost from this impossible target of perfection to a much healthier and more useful one, effective communication.
Which is a much better place for any learner to be.
Without a doubt.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought, something to really chew on that comes directly out of this shift we've been talking about, this move toward English as a lingua franca.
Okay, go for it.
The sources hint at it, but I want to state it more directly. If the vast majority of English speakers in the world today are now non-native, if the real owners of the language are effectively the entire global community, then does the native speaker eventually become irrelevant as the ultimate model for teaching?
That is a profound question. I mean, think about it. If a native speaker from, say, rural Scotland uses a lot of local idioms and cultural references that completely confuse the global community, are they the one with the bad English in that context?
Exactly my point. Perhaps the truly perfect English of the future isn't the English spoken in London or New York or Sydney. Perhaps it's simply the version of English that communicates the most clearly to the most people, regardless of where it comes from.
The standard of the future might not be geography at all. It might just be clarity.
It's something to think about. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're taking a look at a book that is, well, it's essentially the Bible of the English language teaching world, but we're reading it through a very specific lens.
We are.
We are cracking open The Practice of English Language Teaching, the 5th edition by Jeremy Harmer.
And it really is the definitive text. I mean,
Yeah.
if you walk into the staff room of any reputable language school, pretty much anywhere in the world,
London, Tokyo.
London, Tokyo, Hanoi,
Oh, right.
you are almost guaranteed to find a battered copy of Harmer on the shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
It covers everything from the psychology of the learner right down to the nitty-gritty of, grammar instruction.
But we aren't just going to summarize the whole book. That would take us a week, maybe more.
Oh, easily.
We have a specific mission today. We're going to extract 3 heavyweight concepts from Harmer assessment, washback, and adaptive learning, and we're going to unpack them specifically to understand the pedagogical engine running under the hood of THEIELTSFOCUS.
Right. So we're essentially looking at that intersection of testing and teaching.
Exactly.
We want to understand how we measure progress, how those measurements actually change the way students learn, and how technology is just fundamentally rewriting the rules of the classroom right now.
So we've got a clear roadmap for this deep dive. First up, we are going to tackle the washback effect.
Right.
It sounds like something that happens to your laundry, but it's actually a critical concept in education.
It's this invisible force, really, that dictates what happens in the classroom. It's huge.
Okay, then after that, we're going to look at the massive shift that's occurring from summative to formative assessment.
Yeah.
Basically moving away from that sudden death testing model to something more like assessment for learning.
Which is a huge psychological shift for students, moving from a sense of judgment to a sense of growth.
And finally, we're going to look forward. Harmer dedicates a significant amount of time in this edition to the digital age.
He does.
Specifically, adaptive learning and data analytics. We'll get into how technology is solving that age-old problem of mixed ability classrooms, and maybe even whether the traditional course book is doomed to extinction.
It's a fascinating lineup when you put it like that. You've got the pressure of the test, the method of the assessment, and then the tool of the future.
Let's dive straight in then. Section 1, the washback effect. Now, Harmer discusses this in Chapter 22. It's a term that gets thrown around in academic circles, but for the average learner, it might be totally new. Can you define it for us? What exactly is washback?
It's a really interesting concept, and once you get it, you start seeing it everywhere. In simple terms, washback, or sometimes it's called backwash, is the powerful influence that a test has on the teaching and learning that happens before it.
Okay.
Harmer explains it really clearly. The logic is, well, it's almost economic. Teachers, they naturally want their students to pass exams.
Of course.
Students want to pass. Parents are paying for their kids to pass exams.
So there's this massive incentive, this pressure to just focus on the test.
Exactly. So what happens, inevitably, is that the curriculum morphs to mirror the format of the test. The test starts dictating what happens in the classroom. It's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. The assessment isn't just measuring the learning anymore. It's actively directing the learning.
And Harmer points out that this isn't inherently a good or a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
It just is. It's a phenomenon.
Well, he argues that it works in two ways. There's what he calls negative washback, and then there's positive washback.
Okay.
And the difference between those two is often what separates a bad language center from a really great one.
Let's break those down, because I think most of us have probably experienced the negative version and just didn't have a name for it. What does negative washback look like in the wild?
Negative washback is what happens when a test is, let's say, poorly designed, or it focuses way too narrowly on just discrete items.
Yeah.
So imagine you have a major national exam that determines if you get into university. Very high stakes. And that exam only tests grammar through multiple choice questions. The cat sat on the blank, and you have to pick A, B, C, or D.
I have vivid nightmares of those tests. You don't even need to know the language. You just need to know the pattern of the test.
Precisely. And if that's the test, what are teachers going to do? They're going to spend all their class time drilling multiple choice grammar questions.
Of course.
They might abandon communicative methods completely. They'll stop doing speaking practice. They'll stop doing role plays. They'll stop doing any real-world writing tasks like emails or reports. And why?
Because those skills aren't on the test.
They're not on the test. So a teacher might actually want to teach speaking. They might believe, in their heart of hearts that it's important. But the pressure of the test forces them to drop it.
That's incredible.
Harmer notes that teachers often have to go against their own pedagogical beliefs just to make sure their students get the score. It creates this conflict of conscience.
And what's the end result for the student?
You end up with students who are absolute experts at circling A, B, C, or D, but they can't actually order a coffee in English or, write a coherent sentence on their own. The test has narrowed the definition of knowing English down to just knowing grammar rules.
Okay.
That's the essence of negative washback.
Okay, so that is the trap. That is the exam factory model that you hear about. But Harmer argues there's a flip side. What does positive washback look like?
Right, so positive washback happens when a test is actually well designed, when it includes authentic, useful skills. Harmer gives a great example from the Pearson test of academic English.
Okay.
One of the tasks in that test requires the student to read a passage and then summarize it in a single sentence.
Wow, that sounds incredibly difficult.
It is difficult. It requires really high-level cognitive processing. But just think for a second about the washback effect that has on the classroom.
Right.
To pass that part of the test, the teacher has to teach summarization.
They have no choice.
No choice. They have to teach the student how to find the main idea, how to synthesize information, how to discard all the irrelevant details, and how to write concisely.
And summarization isn't just some abstract test trick. That is a valuable real-world life skill.
Exactly. You use it in business meetings. You use it in academic writing. You use it when you're telling a friend about a movie you just saw. So by teaching to the test, in this instance, the teacher is actually teaching a transferable skill that the student will use long after the exam is over.
The test forces the teaching to be better.
That's positive washback.
This brings us directly to the philosophy at THEIELTSFOCUS. And we have a specific note here on how this applies in the Vietnamese context, which is really interesting. The core definition they use is washback latak don quaviek tikulen quatriok.
Right, which, for our listeners, that translates roughly to something like, washback is the impact of exams on the learning process.
So they're acknowledging it right up front. It's not a secret.
It's a recognition that the exam is the gravity holding the whole system together. You can't ignore it.
Right. And the strategic goal at THEIELTSFOCUS is strictly positive washback, or as they say, washback tichkuk. The idea is to avoid that trap of just teaching exam tricks. You know, if you see this word, just pick answer C approach, which is seemingly so common in the test prep industry.
And that's the crucial distinction for any listener out there looking for a language school or an education provider. So many places market themselves on hacks or shortcuts.
Yeah, the easy way out.
But if a center is focused on positive washback, they're focused on transferable skills. They aren't just helping a student survive the IELTS exam, they're teaching them critical thinking, coherent writing, how to structure a solid argument.
The note here says the goal is hooking and tukte de domlaute.
And that's the key phrase right there, learning practical skills for long-term use.
Long-term use.
If you just memorize a template for an essay, which is a really common negative washback tactic, and you might get a 6.5, but then you get to university in another country, and your professor asks you to write a critique of a case study.
The template doesn't work anymore.
The template is useless. You're completely stuck. The IELTS focus is trying to ensure that the preparation for the exam builds the foundation for the life you have after the exam.
But Harmer does mention something interesting about motivation here. Even though teaching to a test can feel restrictive, he admits that exam classes can actually be easier to teach in one specific way.
Yes, motivation. It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Harmer notes that when a whole class is working towards a specific exam, they have a really clear sense of purpose. It gives them this tangible target to aim for.
Right. In a general English class, the goal is often just to get better.
Which is so vague, it's hard to measure getting better week to week. But in an exam class, the goal is concrete. I need a band 7.0. You can see your progress towards that.
So the challenge then, and this is where a place like THEIELTSFOCUS comes in, is to harness that motivation, but channel it into those positive transferable skills.
Precisely. You use the hook of the exam score to get them in the door and keep them working hard. But once they're there, you teach them real English.
So what does that look like?
Well, Harmer suggests that exam skills shouldn't just be about the test format. They should be about things like, using reference tools effectively, working autonomously, reviewing your own work critically.
So meta skills.
Yeah.
Learning how to learn.
Exactly. Those are skills that make you a better learner for life, not just a better test taker. If you can get the student excited about the score, but use that excitement to teach them how to learn. I mean, that's the holy grail of exam preparation.
That is a perfect segue into our second section, assessment for learning. Because if we're moving away from just teaching to the test as a series of tricks, then we have to change how we assess students along the way.
Absolutely.
Harmer talks about a paradigm shift away from what he calls sudden death testing.
Sudden death. It's a dramatic, but I think a pretty accurate way to put it. This brings us to the fundamental difference between summative and formative assessment.
Right.
And this is a distinction that Harmer really hammers home throughout the text.
Let's unpack summative assessment first. Harmer calls this the snapshot. What does he mean by that?
Right. So summative assessment measures the product of learning. It's your typical final exam or the final grade you get at the end of a semester.
It sums everything up.
It sums it up. It tells you what a student knows at one specific moment in time. Think of the big exams you take at age 16 or university entrance exams. It's a judgment. You pass or you fail.
And the downsides seem pretty obvious when you put it that way. It just sounds incredibly high stakes and stressful.
It is. And Harmer points out that because it's just a snapshot, it can be incredibly unfair.
How so?
Well, a student might be brilliant. They might have worked hard all year. They might know the material inside and out. But what if they suffer from test anxiety?
Or they're just having a bad day. They didn't sleep well.
Or they just misread one crucial instruction. The result is a failure. The snapshot comes out blurry, but that grade is permanent.
It judges the student rather than helping them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It kind of closes the door. It says, this is your level. Goodbye. It doesn't tell you how to get better. It just tells you where you are standing right now. It's all retrospective.
Which is why there's such a big push towards formative assessment. Harmer calls this assessment for learning, or AFL. How is this different in practice?
Formative assessment measures ability as part of the learning process itself. The goal isn't to judge the student's current level and just stop there.
Right.
The goal is to help the student progress to the next level.
Yeah.
It's always looking to the future. What do we need to do next? Rather than just looking at the past to see what was achieved. It's perspective, not retrospective.
So practically speaking, at a place like THEIELTSFOCUS, which says it prioritizes this, what does that actually look like day to day? Because I imagine they still have to give grades sometimes.
They do, of course. But the grade isn't the point. It means assessment is integral to the teaching. It's continuous. It's not a big event at the end. And it relies heavily on feedback loops. So instead of just getting a score of 6.0 on a writing task and then moving on to the next one,
Which is what usually happens.
the student gets detailed feedback that explains why it was a 6.0 and, crucially, what specific steps they need to take to make it a 6.5 or a 7.0 next time.
So it changes the test from a barrier into a stepping stone.
That's a great way to put it. It empowers the student. They start to understand their own strengths and weaknesses. They aren't just passively receiving a judgment. They are actively participating in a diagnosis of their own learning.
Now, Harmer goes into a lot of detail on feedback in this context. He makes a distinction between feedback on content and feedback on form. I found this part really interesting because I think it highlights where a lot of traditional education goes wrong.
This is such a critical distinction for teachers, but it's also really important for learners to understand. Harmer asks, when we get feedback, are we responding to what the student is saying? The content, the message, or how they are saying it? The form, meaning the grammar and vocabulary.
And I feel like traditional schooling focuses almost entirely on the form.
Oh, absolutely.
You used the wrong verb tense here. You spelled this word wrong. This preposition is incorrect.
It's the red pen mentality, isn't it? Just circling errors. And Harmer, he references John Hattie's massive meta-analysis of educational research, which found that the right kind of formative feedback is one of the greatest contributors to student success.
But it has to be the right kind.
It has to be balanced. Think about it. If a student tells a story about their weekend, maybe something sad happened, like their dog died, or something exciting like they won a contest, and your only response is to correct their past tense verbs.
You're not really listening to them.
You're not listening to the communication at all. You're treating them like a grammar machine, not a person. You're ignoring the message to fix the medium.
And that must just kill motivation.
It does. It tells the student, your ideas don't matter, only your mechanics matter. And if your ideas don't matter, then why bother speaking? Why bother communicating at all?
So what are some of the techniques Harmer suggests for better feedback? How do we fix this imbalance?
One of the key techniques is incredibly simple. Respond to the content first.
Just react like a human being.
Exactly. Show interest in the student's ideas. So if they say, I go to cinema yesterday, before you jump in and correct when, you ask, oh, really? What movie did you see? Did you like it?
You validate the communication.
You validate the speaker. And once that communication is established and they feel heard, then you can gently correct the form.
He also talks about pursuit questions. I love this term. It sounds like something out of a police chase, but it's a teaching tool.
It's a great term. Instead of just saying good or correct when a student answers, which Harmer actually calls a conversation killer because it just ends the exchange.
Right, there's nowhere to go from good.
Yeah, you ask a follow-up question. You use a pursuit question to force the student to think a little deeper, to defend their answer, or to expand on it.
So if a student gives an opinion like, I think pollution is bad, instead of saying correct grammar, good job, you'd ask, why do you think that? Or what kind of pollution is the worst in your city?
Exactly that. And that is assessment for learning, because the assessment interaction itself is causing more learning to happen. The student has to reach for more language, search for more vocabulary, and structure a more complex sentence just to answer your pursuit question. You are assessing them and pushing them at the same time.
He also mentions the drafting process in writing. This seems like a really big part of the THEIELTSFOCUS strategy.
Yes, process writing is classic formative assessment. In a summative model, you write an essay, you hand it in, you get a C+ back on it, and you throw it in the trash.
And you learned almost nothing from the grading process itself.
You learn nothing, but in a formative model, you write a first draft. The teacher gives you feedback. And not just on grammar, but on the structure, the argument, the flow of ideas. You take that feedback and you write a second draft. The learning happens between the drafts. The assessment directly guided the improvement. The THEIELTSFOCUS uses this approach to make sure the students aren't just being tested on their writing, but are actually being taught how to write through that revision process.
It seems like such a more humane and, frankly, effective way to learn, but let me play devil's advocate here for a second. It also sounds incredibly time-consuming.
It is.
For one teacher to give that level of personalized, deep feedback to 20 or 30 students constantly, I mean, is that realistic?
That is the eternal struggle of education, isn't it? Scaling quality.
Yeah.
You've hit on what's called Bloom's 2 sigma problem, the idea that one-on-one tutoring is by far the most effective method, but we can't afford a personal tutor for every single student.
Right.
And that is exactly where our third topic comes in, adaptive learning and the future trends Harmer discusses in Chapter 4. This is where technology shifts from being just a shiny toy or a classroom distraction to a fundamental structural change in education.
Okay, so let's talk about adaptive learning. What is it, really? We hear AI and algorithms thrown around in every industry now. Is this just a fancy name for an online quiz?
No, it's much more sophisticated than that. Harmer defines adaptive learning as the use of digital software and data analytics to track an individual student's progress. But it goes way beyond just tracking scores. It's not just an Excel sheet saying student A got 80%.
What else is it tracking then?
The software analyzes how a student answers a question. It looks at the metadata of the learning process itself.
The metadata.
Yeah, so how long did they hesitate before clicking an answer? Did they get it right on the second try? Did they check the dictionary definition first? Where exactly do they seem to struggle? Is it vocabulary or is it syntax? Is it their reading speed? It's tracking all these micro-interactions.
And based on all that deep data, the software then makes decisions on its own.
Yes, it acts like a personal digital tutor. It automatically decides what the student needs to do next. It finely tunes the material to the learner's current level in real time.
So if you're flying through the material...
It ramps up the difficulty immediately so you don't get bored. If you're stuck on a concept, it doesn't just let you fail over and over. It might drop back, offer more scaffolding, explain the concept in a different way, or offer some targeted practice in that specific weak area.
That is a total game changer for the one-size-fits-all problem in education.
Completely. Harmer discusses the mixed ability problem in Chapter 7. This is the nightmare of every single classroom teacher. You're in a traditional classroom, you have 30 students.
Yep.
Some are fast learners, some are slow learners, some have a brilliant vocabulary but terrible grammar, others are the complete opposite.
And the teacher is stuck teaching to the middle, which doesn't really work for anyone.
Right. If you teach to the top students, the bottom half gets lost and eventually gives up. If you teach to the bottom students, the top half gets bored and tunes out. It's this impossible compromise.
But with adaptive software.
Differentiation becomes automatic. You can have those same 30 students in a room, and they can all be working on the same topic, but at completely different levels of complexity tailored to them.
So the high achiever isn't waiting around for the rest of the class to catch up?
Not at all. They're pushing ahead to more advanced material. And the student who needs more support is getting that extra practice without feeling like they're holding anyone else back.
Harmer actually speculates about the end of the course book in this section, doesn't he?
He does. It's a pretty bold prediction. He suggests that in a world of truly adaptive learning, the traditional static paper course book might become a thing of the past.
Wow.
I mean, think about a textbook. Chapter 1 is followed by Chapter 2, and everyone does it in that order at the same speed. It assumes everyone learns in this perfectly linear way.
It's a factory model of education.
Exactly. But learning isn't always linear. In an adaptive model, content becomes these chunks of material, videos, exercises, short texts, all stored in a massive database. And they're served up by the system only when the student specifically needs them.
So you kind of build your own textbook as you go, based on your own needs.
That's a perfect way to describe it. It's a much more fluid, personalized, just-in-time way of consuming educational content.
It sounds perfect. I mean, efficient, personalized, data-driven. But Harmer is always the voice of reason. He doesn't think robots are going to completely replace teachers next week, does he?
No, and he's very, very clear on this. He includes a crucial section on the human element. He warns that technology alone is not and never will be a magic bullet. He points to the history of educational technology.
Right.
You know, vinyl records, cassette tapes, the language labs in the 70s.
Oh, I remember language labs,
Yeah.
sitting in a little booth with headphones on. It was so incredibly isolating.
And incredibly boring for most people. Every time a new technology came out, people thought, this is it. This will replace schools. People can just learn at home now.
But they didn't.
They didn't. And the question is, why not?
Motivation.
Motivation. Harmer notes that self-motivation is just incredibly difficult to sustain over the long term without a teacher, without a human guide. A computer program can give you the perfect exercise at the perfect time, but it can't make you care about doing it.
Right.
It can't look you in the eye and say, I know this is tough, but you can do this. It can't provide that uniquely human encouragement or the complex, nuanced guidance that a great teacher can. The dropout rate for purely online, self-paced courses is astronomical for a reason.
So the future isn't software only.
No, the future is what he calls blended learning. That's the ideal mix Harmer points to. You combine the face-to-face teacher support, which provides the motivation, the complex explanations, the human connection, the real speaking practice,
All the things humans are good at.
with the adaptive software that handles the personalized drills, the practice, and the data tracking. All the things computers are good at.
So the teacher does what humans do best, and the computer does what computers do best.
Exactly. The computer handles the grind. The teacher handles the growth. The teacher can look at their dashboard, see that student A is really struggling with the past tense, and then go over and have a real human conversation with them about it. The technology empowers the teacher. It doesn't replace them.
That brings us to our synthesis then. We've talked about washback, assessment for learning, and adaptive learning. How do these three connect for a listener? Because they seem like distinct ideas, but they also feel like they're part of one big ecosystem.
They are absolutely connected. You can think of it as a positive feedback loop. Good technology, specifically adaptive learning, is what makes good assessment possible at scale.
How so?
It allows for that instant, constant, formative feedback that a single human teacher just might not have the time to give to every student every single minute of the day. The software can handle a lot of the form feedback efficiently and immediately.
And that combination, technology and assessment, is what leads to positive washback.
Exactly. When you have personalized feedback and you're working on the specific skills you actually need, rather than just generic drills for a standardized test, you are developing real transferable skills. You aren't wasting your time. So the technology supports the assessment, and the assessment ensures a positive learning outcome. It all works together.
So for a listener, let's try to create a profile. Maybe they're a learner looking for a place to study, or maybe they're just trying to self-study more effectively. What's the takeaway? How can they use this information to make better decisions?
Okay, so if you're choosing a learning path or a center like THEIELTSFOCUS, you need to look for three key things. You can essentially interview the school using these concepts. First, look for the feedback culture.
The feedback culture.
Ask them directly, is assessment used to judge me, or is it used to help me improve? You want formative, not just summative assessment. Ask them, how do I get feedback on my writing? Is it just a score, or is it actionable advice? Do I get to submit multiple drafts?
That's a great, very specific question to ask. If they say, no drafts, you get one shot at the final exam, that's a pretty big red flag.
A huge red flag. The second thing to look for is relevance.
Okay, relevant.
Which is really about washback. Is the test prep just teaching you a bunch of tricks to fool the exam, or is it actually teaching you life skills? Look for centers that talk about critical thinking, summarization, and argumentation, not just multiple choice hacks. You want to leave the course with better English, not just a certificate that says you passed a test.
And the third?
The third is personalization. Is technology being used to tailor the pace and the content to you as an individual? That's adaptive learning. If a program asks every single student to do the exact same thing at the exact same time on a computer, it isn't adaptive.
Right.
But if they have systems in place that adjust to your level, that respond to your answers, then you're in a good place. It shows they're investing in the infrastructure to treat you like an individual, not just another number.
So, formative feedback, positive washback, and adaptive personalization. That's the trifecta.
That is the gold standard for modern language education, absolutely.
I want to end with a provocative thought that Harmer raises. We talked about how things like vinyl records and tapes failed to replace teachers because of the motivation issue. But AI is getting so much more powerful. It can simulate conversation. It can be programmed to sound empathetic. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get frustrated.
It's getting very close. We're seeing AI tutors now that can hold a surprisingly coherent conversation.
So Harmer asks this big question. As adaptive learning becomes more and more sophisticated, will the role of the teacher shift entirely? Will the teacher stop being an instructor who stands at the front of the board explaining the present perfect tense for the 1,000th time?
He suggests that the teacher might become purely a motivator and a guide. If the AI can explain the grammar better and more patiently than a human ever could, then the human teacher's job becomes about psychology. It becomes about coaching, about encouraging, about facilitating that human-to-human connection in the classroom. The teacher becomes the guide on the side, rather than the sage on the stage.
So are we moving toward a world where the job title is language learning coach rather than language teacher?
It's very possible.
Huh?
Or perhaps there's something else. Perhaps language is so fundamentally about the connection between two human souls that a machine, no matter how smart it gets, will always be missing that essential spark that makes us want to communicate in the first place.
We learn languages to talk to people, not to computers.
Exactly.
That's a beautiful thought. We will leave you with that to analyze your own learning environments, look at them through these lenses: washback, formative assessment, and adaptive technology. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Được thành lập 2018 bởi nhóm giáo viên đã có nhiều năm công tác tại các trung tâm lớn uy tín ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. THEIELTSFOCUS không chỉ có các bạn học viên giỏi là các bạn tiến sĩ, bác sĩ, nghiên cứu sinh, các bạn học trường chuyên, mà còn có các bạn học sinh lớp thường đạt được điểm số IELTS và TOEIC cao nhờ vào phát triển được năng lực tiếng Anh thực thụ. Khác biệt với các trung tâm lớn, đông đúc, dùng chung một quyển giáo trình rập khuôn cho hàng ngàn học viên, lúc đi thi gây nhàm chán cho giám khảo chấm điểm. Đa số các chương trình online hay học trực tiếp tại thành phố Hồ Chí Minh của THEIELTSFOCUS chỉ tầm 3 đến 7 học viên, dễ dàng theo sát các bạn, giúp tối đa hóa điểm số nhờ tích hợp nhiều phương pháp trong suốt quá trình giảng dạy. 100% lớp học luyện đề được hướng dẫn bởi thầy Quốc Khánh, IELTS 8.5, Reading 9.0, Listening 9.0 và không có ban điểm nào dưới 8. Các bạn có thể theo học tại quận 6, quận 2, quận 9 và quận 11. Nếu các bạn ở xa, có thể chọn hình thức học online, giáo viên vẫn có thể theo sát được các bạn vì sĩ số lớp vừa phải.
Waves rolling in so slow. Trust the tide, let go. Ooh, yeah. Deep blue, take me home. Feel the calm in my soul. Stars above guide me right. Moonlight whispers through the night.